Hey folks, we have a treat for you today. We love putting people that are living apostolic mission in unique and unrepeatable ways in front of you as examples. Right? Today we have Danielle Bean from the Girlfriends podcast coming in and daniellebean.com. Really excited to have Danielle.
Yes, she is just a wealth of wisdom.
So positive.
You're going to want to sit at her feet and listen. And that's how I felt. So come and join us. You're definitely going to want to stick around and listen to this.
Cool. See you in there. Hey folks, welcome back to the Catholic Coaching Podcast. My name is Matt.
And I'm Erin.
We are your Catholic coaches for the day, and we've got an exciting guest with us today, Miss Danielle Bean.
Woo! Cue like the audience.
I love
The
it.
audience
Cheering.
clapping and everything
Yes.
like that. So probably doesn't need much of an introduction here. You've been on the circuit for a long time as a Catholic author and a writer. And I love the work that you do. It really helps women to enter into the fullness of their dignity, understanding what that means, their worth, their peace, just the joy of family life is one of the things that is such a gift of your ministry. But Danielle's also an author of many books, including You Are Enough, right? One of those things. She's the host of the Girlfriends podcasts, where they share honestly about faith, family, and the struggles of motherhood. If you want to go to a place and find some encouragement and empowerment as a young mother or as a senior, older mother, go to the Girlfriends podcasts. We got to be on the Girlfriends podcast a couple months ago.
Yes.
Really excited about that.
Danielle was an awesome host.
Awesome.
It was
It
so
was so fun
easy.
to do.
So reciprocating here. She's also a host on Catholic TV, and she is a wife and mother of 8. Welcome, Danielle.
Yes.
Thank you so much. It's fun that we kind of flipped sides with the microphone now, and it's fun to come on your show.
I know. Well, we can't wait. You gave us such a space to share everything that the
Yeah.
Lord is doing in our lives, and that was such a gift. Thank you for that. We want to flip this around and really create a space for you to share what's going on in your life. One of the things we do in Metanoia Catholic is we help people to really discern and engage their unique apostolic mission, and so we love bringing on guests that can be an example of that, or at least share their own testimony of how they came into discerning and engaging that unique apostolic mission themselves.
Yes. Yeah. I'm really excited to hear about how you kind of came to discover your own apostolic mission,
Mhm.
which clearly it's working with women.
Right.
That's part
yeah.
of it.
The
But how
podcast
did
is
you?
Girlfriends, so yes, it's women.
Right.
I felt kind of odd being on the Girlfriends podcast. Even your husband, you said, was the first
He was the first guy
to
to come on.
invade, the first XY
Yes.
chromosome on there. But anyways,
Mhm.
Yeah. How did you come to, just if you could give us a brief background of how you came to realize I want to work with women and I want to kind of work in this little niche corner of the church.
Yeah, I mean, I would say I sometimes call it just accidental, which of course nothing is accidental, right? It's all part of God's plan. But I would not have said, I am going to start a ministry for women. I am going to start this apostolate work. And I never would have said that, especially early on, that it wasn't like a plan that I specifically had. I just was kind of responding to these stirrings in my heart, these things that I wanted to share, these people that I wanted to connect with, some of the very real struggles that I was dealing with, especially as a young mom and a newly married woman. These were hard things. And I found myself thinking, we need to talk about these things. And as I was processing these things myself, I was finding that it was helpful to talk with other people who are also processing them from a Catholic and authentically Catholic perspective. And that became so valuable to me that I just wanted to be able to share that. But even before the struggles, I really felt compelled to share the joys of Catholic living, because both are real. They're very real challenges and struggles, but the joys are real too. And I felt like I've been given this beautiful gift in my Catholic faith, and I do not take that for granted. Not everybody's been given that. I had a beautiful childhood. I was raised the 4th of 9 children. My parents did a fantastic job raising us in the faith, and we're all still close in practicing our faith today, which is kind of an unheard of story, So just knowing that I've been given so much that I feel like, misery loves company, but joy loves company too. Like we want to share the good stuff and we want to share the bad stuff. And so I really felt compelled to share in that way. And mostly I started in the very beginning. Now it's like focused on the podcast and Substack and other things that I'm doing. But when I began, it really was just writing from my heart about my own experiences.
Mm. I really think the church needs to hear and have that lens of joy
Hmm.
now. I mean, more, we could argue and say like 20 years ago that we needed that. But I think just right
Mhm.
now, we can kind of go down that dreadful path and keep spinning. And I think
And
just
focus on everything that's wrong.
that's right.
Yeah.
Do you ever feel pushback in that area? Like
Oh, yes.
resistance?
Yeah, and, I've been told by some people that I'm a Pollyanna in some ways, and, I that's just part of who I am. I am naturally an obnoxiously positive person. I can see that.
Mhm.
I try to tame it and make it real, but at the same time, I'm not actually gonna apologize for that because there is a lot of room for growth there in our church, like you said, for sharing the joy. That's
Yeah.
part of what God intends for us,
Mhm.
and there's so much good. There was this beautiful quotation. I'm not going to remember it word for word, but from Venerable Patrick Peyton that really has stayed with me when people were asking him, like, are you going to come out against this and against that and like all these political things?
Mhm.
He said, I don't have time to be against. I'm too busy being for and talking about
Mm.
all the good things that he was for. And I love to reflect on that and
Mm.
really try to live my life emulating that I want to be so much for all these good things that we have going on, the good things that God has planned for us in our faith and family lives. I don't have any time for that negative. So it's not pretending the negative doesn't exist, but at the
Yeah.
same time, really being realistic about the fact that God wants us to be joyful people.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's called good news for a reason, right? Because
Right.
indeed it is good news, and even whenever we're listening, we're always a big part of what we do at Metanoia is we help people to consider and live in their unique design. So like at the
Mhm.
root of apostolic mission, there's identity, but there's also relationship, and we
Hmm.
as Catholics we can't understand who we are outside of that relationship with God Himself, and so you saying that I'm a positive person, and some people perhaps seeing that as an obstacle, or it's like, oh well, maybe I'm tempted to go down this
Mhm.
path of being more of a reformist and
Mm.
looking at all the problems, everything. Like here, you're just showing up in the authentic identity that God has given to you as a positive person, and this is kind of just overflowing, and it's being fruitful.
Mhm.
Mhm. Right,
Yeah.
right. I think that's a really beautiful way of looking at it. And it's very encouraging to hear you say that because that's what we're called to be. I don't want to have to try to cover up or change who I am at that basic level because it's meant to be a gift and God has a plan for using that
Mm.
in the world for his purposes, for growing his kingdom here on earth. So who am I to say that's not the right way because it doesn't match the way this other person's doing it down the street or whatever, or somewhere else in the church. So fully embracing who we are. Of course,
Yes.
that doesn't mean full on embracing our faults, and we can talk a little bit more about
Mhm.
that, being realistic about that. But
Mhm.
these real gifts that God has given us, our natural temperament and our personality, we're meant to use those things to serve the people in the world and bring everyone closer to Christ.
Love
Amen.
it.
You are preaching our language.
Yes,
We
ma'am.
love. We love. I mean, as soon as you started talking, I'm like, she's sanguine. Oh my gosh, she's totally sanguine. Yeah.
And that's awesome. So also with this, as a mom, right? You're a mom of 8.
Mhm.
Mhm.
You've written how many books at this point have you written?
It's 10 now. One
What?
with my husband, which is kind of cheating because I didn't do the whole work, and one with Elizabeth Foss, who's a dear friend of mine from
Oh, we
many years.
love
Yeah, she went through
Elizabeth.
her certification as well.
Yes.
So
Yes.
okay, so you're writing, you have
Mhm.
your podcast, it's a weekly podcast.
Correct.
You're also traveling and you're speaking.
Mhm.
You're a mom of 8. How dare you? How dare you have such like this distraction from your Christian vocation?
Mm,
Okay, obviously tongue in cheek here, but like
right.
tell us a little bit about like
Yeah.
how does this work
The
to
balance.
have
Yeah,
right? Because there's certainly a lot of time that goes into these things
for sure.
to produce some of the fruits.
Oh, so much to say on this topic, and I
Mhm.
like that you voice it that way because I have in very real ways, heard exactly that from people through the years, and I totally
Mm,
get it. So it looks different now, for sure. So let me just tell you the age and stage of life I'm at now. My All of my kids are grown. I've got one 18-year-old who's still living at home this school year, and he'll be going away to college next year. Quite different from when we had 8 under the age of 12,
Mm.
like that was a different stage of life. And my work life looked different then. I did always, not always. It was when I was pregnant with our fifth that I really began doing any kind of writing. So it
Okay.
starts there, kind of in the middle of our family life, right in the thick of it, right in the chaos of it. But that was part of what God was planning. So it looks different now. There are commitments I'm able to take on now that I never would have even considered, back in those earlier days. But I always have kind of, I like that word balance, thinking about balance. What does that look like? And to me, I always need to remind myself and remind other people balance is movement. Like we tend to think that balance is like freeze frame. Everybody's in their place, all is
Mhm.
well, and everything's attended to. I'm balanced, and you want to freeze there. But in real life, it doesn't work that way. You can't
Mm,
freeze frame,
Mhm.
and you're continually in motion. You're focusing on one thing, then you're focusing on another thing, and when you're focusing on one thing, you're necessarily not focusing on that other thing. So you're moving and shifting your time and attention. But I found it was really important for me because I'm the kind of person who I just want to do all the things and I want to take on everything. And yes, 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 because there's so many great things to do in the world. But it was so helpful for me to always remember through the years, I'm married to my husband Dan for a reason. And he is this great gift to me in that he's very grounding, he's very practical about things. And we would consider these things together. Does this make sense? Does it
Mm.
not make sense? Is this something we need to say no to for now, even though I thought I was like had to do the thing, and sometimes you have to say no and always just remembering, like, saying no to something is really saying yes to something else in your life. If
Mhm.
I'm saying no to this great work opportunity, this thing, then I'm saying yes to my home, my family, my kids, my
Mm.
husband, what's going on here in the heart of this home. And always trying to balance that. And one other point I want to make, and we can talk more about this topic, but I this idea of women working, I always try to check myself, and I invite other people to check themselves too with regard to the work you're going to do that's kind of outside of your primary vocation, I would
Mhm.
say. So for me, that meant outside of my marriage and motherhood, work I might be doing in the world. And like, what is your motivation?
Mm.
And Father Jacques Philippe, I'm a huge fan of Father Jacques Philippe, and he has this word that he uses talking about your ego. And he says vainglory. Is it for vainglory? And that is a word that really means a lot to me. And it sticks with me because I can really feel convicted if I'm
Mhm.
thinking about a particular opportunity and like, what is my motivation here? Is it for the greater glory of God or is it vainglory? Is it about my
Mhm.
own ego? Is this something that I want to accomplish for me and get the glory attached to this thing? And sometimes if I'm being honest with myself and in conversation with my husband or with my kids, have to be honest about what's really motivating you and it can really clarify what you do need to say yes to and what you need to say no to.
Mm. Love that.
Danielle, do you have a specific example that comes to mind of when you engaged in that discernment and you decided, you know what, like I I don't think the Lord is calling me to go forward with this initiative. You discerned a no.
Yeah. So I did have an opportunity to become like a someone sort of in residence with sort of an academic institution at one point, and I love the idea of it, and I had
Mm.
never even had a conversation or been invited to be a part of something like that, and I was so, intrigued with this idea, but when we sat down and looked at the time commitment, looked at, the balance it would be between work and family and what they were offering me for it, it didn't make sense.
Mm.
And it just killed me to say no to that thing because it was like there were other people I knew that were doing it, it looked so great, but that was one where I really had to be honest, like, why would I want to say yes to this? Because here are all these negatives that we would
Mhm.
feel as a result of it, very negative
Mm,
things and real things, and so really what was motivating me was like, I didn't wanna miss out, that fear of missing
mm,
out, seeing other people enjoying this opportunity, and then, of course, your own ego involved in it, like, that would have been a different kind of work for me, something that would have received certain kinds of accolades, and
Mm.
it was not, and I know this with such clarity now, even though it took a real process of discerning at the time, was not something I was supposed to do. And now I can kind of look back and it's so clear that it wasn't something I was meant to say yes to. It was a distraction. And so that I don't regret that decision at all. That said, there have been times when I've taken on too many things and suffered the consequences of that. This is part of how we learn, right? Like,
Mm,
whoa,
mhm.
that was not the right balance. That's not what balance needs to look like for us. And you kind of find that out when it hits you in the face. So that's been part of our discernment process as well, is that very real nitty-gritty, not so glamorous, and times of figuring out that that was not the right way to approach it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. I love how practical it is too. And it seems very like congruent with what we do as well. But I love the whole, know your motivation and maybe don't immediately judge it, but just like know it,
Hmm.
and bring that to the Lord.
And
But
it
I,
was
I
even like the "we sat down" portion that you said. It's like, it's not just I went into my room and I figured this out. Like, you
Right.
approached it with, your husband, it sounds like,
yes,
and there
yeah,
was a
you brought in other
conversation.
stakeholders
Yeah.
Yeah.
into
Yeah,
the
right, I like
decision.
that word, stakeholders.
Yeah,
So, yeah,
yeah.
definitely your spouse is a part of that and an integral part of that, but then as my kids got older, I found that they were helpful in these kinds of
Mm.
conversations as well. There were times when my kids were my biggest cheerleaders and like, "Yeah, that definitely, you go do that, mom," and
Aw.
other times, like, especially during the pandemic or toward the end of it, that I had, teenagers that were living here at home, and 2 of my sons on separate occasions came to me at a point and said, "You know what? It's really nice that you haven't been traveling so much. It's really nice that
Mm,
we can count on you being here each weekend." And that really spoke volumes to me. Like,
mm,
going back, and I think many people experienced this, after the COVID thing, was like, do I want to go back to everything? Am I going to pick everything back up again? Or
mm.
maybe this is a fresh start and an opportunity to see what a new balance would feel like.
Mhm.
Yeah, I love that. Everything you're saying, I'm like, totally resonates with me. Like, because we're both sanguine. I think that's part of the reason why. The one thing I really love that you said about balance is movement. And the word picture that came to mind is almost like you're trying to balance, those big sticks on your hand,
Right?
and you have to keep moving your hand. You are the one that's moving. And that's like
Hmm.
the word that kind of came to me, or the picture that came to me through that. I love that so much because you're right. I think a lot of people can associate with balance with this restful state and
Right.
like, oh, I've arrived because I feel balanced. And it's
Yes.
like, no, no, this is going to take something from you constantly.
Exactly, exactly, and I think that's the temptation, and I totally get it because that's just human, right? Like, I think about times when, people are coming over to the house and there's that frenzy, like, "Oh, let's get the house in order and, like, get all the kids cleaned up," and, especially
Never
when they were
happens
little,
here.
it was such a battle to do that, and I remember, right before people arriving, just, like, looking at my kids, like, "Everybody's clean, the house is clean, like, the food is prepped," and just being like, "Nobody move," right? Like, "This is it. Like, take the picture right now," and life isn't real like that, so
No.
that's not the reality.
Yeah.
You shared a little bit about what it was like with having finding that balance between your apostolate and then your primary vocation as a wife and mom.
Mhm.
One of the things we often hear from people that are on mission is how much the mission works on them, right? And so we can
Mm,
get into this mindset that mission is just going out and we're doing all the work, impacting and impressing other people, but rather there's an impression that's coming back and there's a change that's happening. There's something sanctifying, arguably, that's happening here
Absolutely.
as well. Can you share a little bit about how the mission has ministered to you, right? Your apostolate has been an apostolate to you, but also how that's impacted even your vocation.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think that that's a very astute observation, I think, that many people experience when they're doing this kind of work. But for sure I've experienced that through the years where the way I share and the way that I minister a lot of times is just sharing like what's going
mm,
on in my life and what's going on in my heart, my mind about these things. And so as I've been doing that through the years, it invites me to that deeper reflection.
mm,
And whether it's in writing or sharing in a podcast or giving a retreat, I find that when we get together with each other and especially with a group of women, there's this vulnerability that comes with that. We need to
mm,
be vulnerable to each other in those communications for it to be truly valuable. But when that happens, that is so beautiful. And it
Mm.
is such a gift to me. Like, so many times I talk about and joke about, I'm recording the Girlfriends podcast because I need to talk about these things. Like,
mm,
I need to, invite people on to discuss these things. I need a built-in excuse to call up my girlfriend and record a conversation where we're going to talk about these things that I'm really struggling with, or I'm not sure how to approach it yet, or, this new stage of life, or this new experience we're having, or, so I find that that's been so beautiful for me that all
mm.
along, this kind of forum that I try to provide for Catholic women is one that I need myself. And so
Mhm.
often the inspiration for different topics to take on are the things that are running through my mind, or
Mm.
things that at least I can recall, like early in my motherhood. What did I really struggle with? What were my questions? And that becomes fodder for future conversations. And so I find that it's really just a working through this process together,
Mhm.
that in the end, that it allows me to be a more reflective person. If I didn't have to write about this thing, if I didn't have to talk about this thing, it would be easy to just live very surface level and just be
Mhm.
skimming along. And so this is like a built-in kind of check for me, where I mean, people can do this in different ways, but for me, having this kind of work and really being obligated to kind of go deeper and have these moments of reflection and be prepared to share about them, not in a way like I'm preaching down from a mountaintop like I've got it all figured out, but really just, sharing what that process is like.
Mhm.
It's a way of holding me accountable for doing that deeper work.
That's interesting,
Mm.
because even the for sanguines, often a common weakness that you find is that there's a lack of depth, right? It
Mhm.
stays at a very superficial level. So broad strokes here, but here you use the words accountability, and even the ministry and your work going out is holding you accountable to do some of that work of going deeper,
Mhm.
and in going deeper, you're it's almost like you're just going first, and you're just inviting other people into that deeper conversation that you're having. So all the great sanguine positive gifts of being able to just interact and be very talkative and charismatic are there, but at the same time you can see the Lord even perfecting you
Mm.
and bringing you to greater depths and greater in relationship. I'd love to hear a little bit too about that relationship that you've had with the Lord and how that's matured uh, over time through this apostolic work.
Yeah, so that's for sure something I've needed to be reflective about, and mostly I reflected a lot in my book Whisper, which was published by Ascension Press a few years ago, where I kind of found myself at a stage of life where I had older kids, I had kids who were leaving the home, and in some ways my life was bigger than it had ever been, but then in other ways it was kind of becoming smaller,
Mm,
and I found myself like almost feeling like I spent a year just exhaling, and like, okay, what just happened here? And kind of you can kind of take a breath for a moment, for the first moment in many years. And that was kind of astonishing to me in the kind of when I pitched that book idea to Ascension, I remember talking with their marketing team before it, and they were kind of like trying to get at the heart of like, what is it you want to say? What is it you want to do? And I felt almost dumb, like this is so no-brainer, but like my eyes are like opened to the
Mm.
fact that God's been present right here through all of this, through all of my busyness and distraction, and which honestly, I'm not judging myself or anybody else for those years of busyness and distraction, because I really feel like it's a natural part of our progression in our relationship with God. That
Mm.
when you're young and you're starting your family and you're starting your career, like it's go, 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 go all the time. But then as we grow a little bit older and our lives shift and change, we find ourselves with a little bit more time,
Mm.
that it becomes a natural progression in your relationship with God to just be,
mm,
to be still, and to allow God to find you rather than feeling like you have to do everything, like going out and seeking God and finding God. It was so like overwhelming to me to suddenly realize I can allow myself to be found. What a
Mm.
gift that is, and that we have a God that loves us on such a deep and personal level, that he's seeking us and he's finding us, and that all we need to do is be still
Mm.
and open our hearts to him. That was something that I could have heard somebody speak about when I was much younger,
mm,
and it wouldn't have really made much of a difference in my life. Like this is the kinds of things that you need to be at that stage and experiencing yourself.
Mhm.
And so I've loved being able to share from this different perspective now, kind of what I feel like is a natural progression in spiritual life. And I think most writers can relate to the idea that you might look back at something you wrote 10 years ago and you just cringe, like, oh my gosh, like who even was I? Like, and we have the gift of social media coming and reminding us, like, on
Mhm.
this day you said this, and I'm like,
Yeah.
what? Like,
Yes.
and but I think that's also a gift too, to be reminded of how far we've come, that
Mm.
we kind of can fall into this habit of thinking like I'm the same person as I was back then, but really you're not. I mean, on a basic level you are, but really you're not. You're evolving and you're changing, and God is doing good work in you.
Mm.
mm,
Do you find I'm curious, so like looking back on just the years that you've been like writing books and ministering to women, and you kind of spoke to this a little bit, but do you find that like there's particular problems? This is like kind of like a no-brainer question, but tell me about the different problems that you deal with different people at different phases of their life. Does that make sense? Like, so like
Yeah.
new moms who have got the littles running all around, like what are you talking with them about? And then, people who maybe have kids in school but are still kind of like, I feel like the Lord's calling me to do something. I don't know. I'll let
Mhm.
you talk.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think that part of the gift that I've been given in being able to do this work is that I do hear from people at different ages and stages of life, and I can see all of their different perspectives on it. And yeah, a young mom who's coming to me with, little kids running around and she's feeling called to do some kind of work and she's not sure what that could look like. I can totally relate to that. I
Mhm,
I understand that. And but also the mom who's coming to me and saying, my kids are moving out and I'm not sure what now. I
mm,
can relate to that too. And but at the core of all of these things, and this is something that I've been able to see through the work that I've done with women through the years, especially in the church, is that women struggle, and this is just a human situation probably, with this idea of identity. Like, am I a wife? Am I a mom? What does that mean? What does that mean at
mhm,
this stage in my life? Am I called to do this kind of work? How is that part of my identity? And at our core, we need to always be reminded of where we discern our self-worth. And it's not in any of these other exterior things. It's in our relationship with God. It's in our identity as the precious daughters of God. And so, you mentioned my book, You Are Enough, at the start,
mhm,
and that's been my most popular book by far. And I think it's because, first of all, that title speaks to the hearts of women because so many of us, no matter what's going on in your life, are struggling. Like, don't feel like you're enough or don't feel
mhm,
like you're up to the task or feel like you're the only one that's struggling or failing in these certain ways. And yet that book is a reminder of our core identity as daughters of God, looking at stories of women in the Old Testament, and these women who lived so long ago, and so many details about the Old Testament are so weird and like they don't apply, we don't think, to
mhm.
our lives today, but they do. At the core of these stories, the hearts of these women are very much like our hearts, and they're struggling with a lot of those same things. And ultimately, the answer for all of these things is found in our identity as daughters of God.
Mm. I feel like you need a follow-up book to that one, and it's "You Aren't Too Much." It's like, "You're not enough, and you're too much." Those are the 2 lies that the enemy tells us. So,
It's
I'm
true.
so glad that you talked about that because I can't even tell you how many times or that you wrote a book about it. I kinda wanna do, like, a book study, like, in our academy on it because I can't even tell you how many times we have coached people on this "I'm not enough."
Yeah, the other piece
Um,
is like how much we've coached moms in our academy on the shame of wanting more
Mhm.
yes,
than
yes.
just and it's even like me saying this and like just being a mom, because me being a mom, being a dad, it's incredible,
Mhm,
and there's still this longing that perhaps to do something outside of the family or beyond the
Mhm.
family, which I think there's even something appropriate about that. We're not building little cloisters, but we're
Mhm.
we're called to be apostolic.
mhm.
So perhaps something that's a little bit more apostolic, and there's fear and there's shame around that, and there's a lot of shoulds that people are dealing with. How is that showing up in your ministry, and how do you counsel those women?
Yeah, I think a big part of that is our culture is so unhelpful here. The like
Yeah.
the fake mommy wars, the stuff about like, oh, I'm a stay-at-home mom, I'm a work-at-home mom, I'm a go-to-work mom, I'm a all
Homeschool
these.
mom, yeah.
Yes, all of these labels, and I don't know. I honestly don't know who benefits. It's probably like social media algorithms benefit or something from, propagating these wars, these fake wars between women and setting up these sides. And I find it so false. Like, it's
Mm,
so false. Like, we aren't on opposite sides. And everybody is just trying to figure this out. And especially, women in the church trying to do their best. And it's going to look different for every one of us. Like, what that combination of things is going to look like. And you're so right, Matt, that there's shame involved in that.
mhm,
So many women will share with me feelings of shame on all ends of the spectrum with regard to the decisions they're making, whether it's deciding to work or it's deciding to stay home or it's, bottle feeding or breastfeeding or letting your child cry it out and all these things that people will set up these divisive lines about. And I just find it so enormously unhelpful to women, especially because we need each other. And these things are
Yes.
set up to divide us. And so I really see the work of the enemy here. And this is something I've spent a lot of time thinking about and sharing about is that it really is a great compliment to women the way that the enemy will focus on us in that way, right?
Mm,
Like, because, and especially that he'll try to divide us. And this really motivates me sometimes because it's we are such a powerful force for the good when we have each other's backs,
mm,
when we encourage and affirm in each other and our natural gifts and in our identity as precious daughters of God. There's so much good that we can do in the world. We can change the whole world. And yet it can be so easy to just insert a little division, a little competition, a little jealousy, and it
mm,
all can fall apart from there. So I think being cognizant of that is really important because we need to be aware of what's going on and like what are these pressures that we're feeling? What are these labels that we're just accepting or these dividing lines that our culture will tell us need to exist in our lives? And how are those not serving us as Catholic women? How can we come together and really encourage and support each other in all the different ways that God is calling us in, the religious vocations, vocations to marriage and motherhood, different kinds of work and ministry that we do in the world that each woman is called to be a gift, a unique and unrepeatable gift
Mm.
to the people that God places in her life. Of
mm.
course, that's going to look different for everybody.
Yeah,
So, I mean, it's just,
and the way that the shoulds, all of these at the
yes.
Yeah.
root of all these divisions is a should, which, and if you're listening to a should, you're not listening to the Lord, and that's like at the root of it. It's where are you going to like get that identity, where get that affirmation that you're talking about, get that mission spoken to you, because if you're
Mhm.
not going to the Lord, you will have no problem finding people that wish to speak an identity over you. But it's
For
not necessarily
sure.
for your sake. It's something consumptive at that point that's self-serving. It's like, I want to be affirmed in
Mm,
my stance that I've chosen this state in life and this is the right way, and versus the diversity and the natural diversity, the real diversity that goes in consulting with the Lord, that unique and unrepeatable gift that you are, and that unique and unrepeatable mission that you are. And you just fired me up, Danielle. And we just need more
me too.
people speaking
Yeah.
Right.
with the Lord on this. I think we've forgotten how to do that.
Yeah. I think that's a good point. And Danielle, yeah, I want to kind of bounce off of what Matt was just saying too. It's this whole, I think it's shoulds, but I
Hmm.
think it's also there's a right way.
Yeah.
Mm,
And
Hmm.
yes, there is a right way, right? There's a moral way that has been laid out
right.
for us, right? That's the deposit of faith.
Hmm.
But also, it's not in regards to like how you are particularly supposed to be a mom. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, so there is
Mhm.
distinction there. There's not like a right way in that capacity. There's more of a nuance, and the Lord's like, I want to reveal that to you. Come to me.
It's personal, not some
Yes.
Yeah.
universal. I
Yes.
mean, yeah, there's always going to be universal morals that we're all subject to, but like on a, but we make a lot of error. We run into error, as Aquinas says, when we take a particular and we make it a universal.
Mm,
Yes. Yes, I think that's so true, and that's rampant in the church today, in
completely.
It's
the
lazy.
voices you hear online,
It's
like
lazy. It's pharisaical.
Yeah.
Yeah.
yeah, it's crazy, and so the people that you'll run into that will say, "No, there is one right way, right? And it's my way."
Mm.
And I get the temptation because,
Mhm.
especially when I was younger, I was so insecure about so many things that I was doing or that we were, making these decisions as a family that I just wanted to be sure there's one right way and it's the way I'm doing it, right? So
Mhm.
like you want to believe that. But that's I mean, the church in her wisdom has given us, directives on the things that really matter and clear directives, but so many things has not spoken about, right? So
Mm.
Mhm.
there's a
Mhm.
lot of leeway, there's a lot of room for very different approaches, and some of them might not ever be the approach that you would take, and that is okay. It doesn't mean it's not okay for that person. So I think we do need these reminders sometimes because of that temptation, whether it's because of our egos or because of insecurity, that we kind of want to draw those hard lines and say, I had a woman last week, we had a live Q&A and she was asking, "Is Botox a sin?" And I was like, "Interesting. Well, the church has not said so, specifically. And then, let's talk about that and how, what factors might come into play in making decisions about these kinds of things in our world today." But like, with that specificity, people sometimes want you to tell them like, "This is right and this is wrong and this
Yes.
is the way and
Well,
this
then
is
they
not
don't
the
have to
way."
do their own work.
Yeah.
They
Right.
don't have to search their own intentions, like you were saying, and kind of
Mhm.
like it, and that reflective discernment process that it 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 helped you actually ultimate like to it helped you to achieve the ultimate goal which is a deeper relationship with the Lord through all of these
Mhm.
things. So it's not like getting it right. It's about getting aligned with the way himself in relationship with the way.
Mhm.
Discernment is more of a relationship than it is just weighing the options and
Yeah.
making some sort of like, oh, this one looks like it, I got six things in this column and only two. We're going to go with the six
Mm.
in terms of it. Yeah, it's more relational.
And I also think probably a lot of the women that you're working with too. I think people. I don't want to just assume it's lazy.
Mm,
I think it's also from exhaustion.
mm,
Like, oh, this is like another thing that I have to do.
right.
But I think also like there it's not something you have to do. It's something that you go and rest in them. Like what you were talking
Mm-hmm.
about earlier. Just like,
Mhm.
no, no, no. You're letting him pursue you and
Right.
reveal things
That was
to
the
you.
difference between a choleric and a sanguine phlegmatic interpretation. You're lazy. It's like, no,
Let's just
Not
challenge that.
necessarily, right? I love that. And I love that you're talking about it as a relationship because that's the key. That's what it is. And
Mhm.
we would like for it to be this kind of, black and white process and that's how you figure these things out, but it is about putting in that work and there's nothing glamorous about it and it
Mhm.
doesn't always feel good, but that's what we're called to do. So really that's the process that we're called into and each of us can only do our own work. And that's when we get tempted to distraction and division is when we start trying to do other people's work or we start taking on things that was never
Yes.
meant to be our work because we see other people doing
Mhm.
it.
Yes, completely. There's a lot of stuff that we do here at Metanoia that talks a lot about locus of control in that
Mhm.
capacity. And it's like what is within your responsibility and what is not. And it does minimize a lot of unnecessary judgments. And but
Mhm.
it's such a I mean, it's such a wise thing that you just said right there. It's just like we so want to go in and change everyone to make our lives easier, right? And but yeah, I don't know.
I
That
think
got
that's
me
great.
fired up.
Talking about what's in your control, I think, is a really key thing because,
100%.
I recently ran into actually Mel Robbins is like this famous podcaster woman. She's not Catholic or anything, but I
Mhm.
loved something she shared, which was this philosophy of let them. And it was kinda life-changing for me
Mm.
because it made me realize how much I wasn't letting people be who they were, and I felt like I needed to control everybody's feelings, everybody's actions in my immediate family with my husband, my kids, and my extended family, like, let them, they're they're gonna do something you'd rather they didn't do. Let them. You don't have control over it anyway, and,
Mhm.
you feel like this person's gonna say this thing, and then this person's gonna be upset, and let them. It's not
Yes.
your responsibility. Let them say the thing. Let them be
Mhm.
upset. Let them work it out. And that was very freeing for me because
Mm.
it made me realize just how much I was clinging to this sense of control over these things.
Mhm.
I imagine that was such a relief for you.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
just like, "Oh, it's not my
It's
responsibility." Just
not.
you
Some
let
things
it go.
are, and I need to
Yes.
focus on those. And sometimes you are able to provide encouragement or
Mhm.
advice, but a lot of times, especially in these relationships with other people who are adults, you do need to just let them. And
Mm.
that's very freeing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mhm.
I'd love to kind of as we wrap up here. It's a question I always love asking our guests, and it has to do with a movie. I think movies or a media or a song that has kind of touched your heart. That's kind of even perhaps like revealed some sort of resonance of your own mission, right, and your own apostolic mission, or stirred something in you. Presuming that you've got something like that. Is there a movie or a song that's really been a big impact on you? It doesn't necessarily have to be something that's, religious even.
Oh, yeah, it's actually not. The one that comes to mind is not religious, and this is goofy, and some people get it and some people don't, and tell me if you've seen this movie. It's called Marcel the Shell with Shoes on. Have you heard this movie?
No.
I
Okay.
think I've just heard of this one. It's like
Okay,
there's
well,
a
it's
book
a
on it,
YouTube
right?
sensation. He was a
Okay.
YouTube
Okay.
sensation first, like these little shorts that they were making on YouTube. And it's the goofiest, craziest thing. Like when I describe it, it sounds insane, but it's
Mhm.
like a little shell that has a personality. And you kind of go on this little adventure with him. And it's kind of like stop motion with these
Mhm.
figures, but then there's real people in the movie as well. Oh, that thing just pulled me all over the map emotionally. It was like
Mm.
very real things, like he's searching for his family and, he's just kinda struggling with a lot of things, but also he's just this tiny little what would the world would see as a nothing,
Mm.
and he's got such personality, and he cares deeply about things, and you see the beauty and the value of the individual there, and it just is such a beautiful movie, and it's so funny because, like I said, some people get it and some people don't. Like, half my family was like me with this. We're like, "Ah, this is like the best thing ever." And then the other half was like, "What was that?" Like,
I don't get it.
so, yeah, so I'm gonna recommend it to people, but what I find is that there's really a need for movies like that even from a secular perspective,
Mhm. Mhm.
speak to the value of every human life, speak to the value of every person, each individual, and the gift that we're meant to bring into the world, and in a very real way, like we talked about at the start, like, the joys of the world, the beauty of the world. There's so much to be explored there and so much to share on an artistic level.
Mhm.
And, this movie just did it really creatively in a way that really resonated with me. So I really appreciated that. So I'm recommending it, but with a caveat, you may totally not get it.
Is it a good sit down with your 6-year-old and watch as a family
Yes,
movie?
totally.
Cool.
Yeah, there's nothing inappropriate in it. And it was just like a really kind of fun, and there were hilarious things in it as well. And so I'm totally recommending it, but knowing that some people just won't get it. And I'm sorry for you.
You're like, too
Marcel
bad.
the Shell.
Too bad.
Awesome.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Danielle, for being with us. Now, this is going to be releasing, roughly a month before Advent. You've got something on Substack
Yeah.
that's specifically for Advent. Can you tell us about that and where people can find what the your Advent offering
Sure,
on
thank
Substack?
you. Yeah, so my Substack is called Girlfriends After Hours because it's meant to be a way of connecting beyond the podcast. So I love being able to do the podcast, but I find it's very one-sided. You guys know this sometimes when you're
Yep.
just talking into a microphone. And so I love kind of building community over there. So this is at Substack, and the URL is daniellebean.substack.com. You can go over there and you can subscribe for free to check out some of the basic content. There is an upgrade to fully participate in some of the challenges, but the content we have planned for Advent, I'm super excited about. We're going to be diving into the Gospels together. We're going to go through the Gospel of Luke,
Mhm.
which I've always had this. I've done this in previous Advents, but not quite in this way, where there are 24 chapters in Luke. And so starting December 1st, which happens to be actually the first day of Advent this year, it works out perfectly.
Ooh.
We're going to go through one chapter at a time and really just engaging in some Lectio Divina and community discussion around these themes. There's going to be weekly live videos as part of this as well at over there all through Advent. So that's at Girlfriends After Hours. The URL again is daniellebean.substack.com. I would love for everybody to join us. We're always looking for like what we're going to do for Advent. Well, this is your answer. Like this is very simple. Get yourself signed up. And the more people we have there, the richer the experience becomes for
Mm.
everyone.
How
Beautiful.
beautiful that you're preparing for the word coming in the flesh by diving into his word. I love
Perfect,
that.
isn't it? Yeah.
Love
Yeah.
Makes
that.
sense. So, folks, thank you. Applause. Yes. Thank you so much,
Yay.
Daniel, for being with us. I know the Girlfriends podcast is where they can find you on iTunes and all the other
Yes.
different places where you can get your
Mhm.
podcasts here. Do you have a YouTube or anything like that,
I
Danielle?
don't. So if people want to see anything that I'm working in, go to daniellebean.com. You can get
Okay.
connected to the Substack and the podcast, everything right there.
Yeah. You're
Great.
looking for a speaking opportunity or a speaking gig for Danielle. Want to bring Danielle to your parish or to your next event? You can go to daniellebean.com. Correct? I said it
Absolutely.
right? Yep.
Yes, correct.
And get some information on how to bring Danielle to your next event. Folks, thank you so much for being with us at the Catholic Coaching Podcast. We hope that this example of apostolic mission has stirred something in you. And if you are watching on YouTube and this did stir something or awaken something, even if it was a question, we invite you to just jump into the comments section and just write that in. We love responding to comments. So go ahead, jump in there, write those comments down. Sometimes the comments that you leave are the things that bless people the most on our YouTube channel. So be charitable, right? And think of blessing somebody else with your comments here as well. Danielle, thank you so much for being with us. We hope to have you back here again.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
All right. Hey, thanks for sticking with us in the Catholic Coaching Podcast. If you like what you heard,
please like and subscribe, and we'll see you again.